This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
African countries ramp up containment measures as confirmed COVID cases rise to nearly 460 on the continent. As a new cabinet is sworn in, displaced South Sudanese hope for peace. And in South Africa, wildfires destroy parts of Table Mountain National Park. Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. And with me in studio is Raman Young with a preview of your business news.
That's right, Lindy. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. South Africa's finance minister asks banks to take it easy on people they've lent money to as the country's battling the COVID-19 epidemic. And the IMF says it can mobilize $1 trillion if need be in support of member states affected by this pandemic. We'll have the details on those stories and lots more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Lindy.
Thanks, Rama. Well, we start in China, which has responded to the US government's continued restrictions on Chinese media agencies. Since December 2018, the US government has required Chinese media organizations to register as foreign agents. It further designated 5 Chinese media entities as foreign missions and imposed a cap on the number of employees. In response, China has asked the China-based Voice of America, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and the Washington Times to submit information on their staff, finances, operations, and real estate in China. The Chinese government is further asking that American staff members of specifically the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Washington Post notify the Department of Information of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs within 4 calendar days if their press credentials are set to expire before the end of 2020. And now to the latest on how the coronavirus pandemic is spreading across Africa. 30 countries have now confirmed nearly 460 cases. Northern Africa has the highest number of cases, with the majority in Egypt. 2 more deaths have been reported there, bringing the total to 4. In West Africa, confirmed cases have also gone up slightly. A second Liberian has tested positive for COVID-19. He is a domestic worker of the first patient who is the head of the country's Environmental Protection Agency. In East Africa, Rwanda has the highest number in the region. The nation closed schools and places of worship soon after its index case was reported. Kenya has confirmed 1 more case, bringing its total to 4. The latest patient returned from the UK last week and contact tracing is underway. Central Africa still has the lowest recorded number of overall cases, that's 18. But in Cameroon, the number of cases there doubled to 10. Meanwhile, South Africa has declared a national state of disaster, with the country currently having the second highest number of cases on the continent. Now, Nigeria has added more countries to its priority watch list amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Authorities say these steps are necessary to protect its 200 million citizens. CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam has more.
Nigerian health authorities announcing plans to beef up efforts in containing COVID-19 in the country. They've begun the re-evaluation of its case definition. China, Iran, Italy, Japan, and the Republic of Korea were on Nigeria's list of countries with high transmission risk. Now France, Germany, and Spain are the recent additions. It implies that travelers arriving Nigeria from these countries would remain in self-isolation for 14 days.
We continue to monitor returning travelers that fit our case definition and improve our surveillance, detection, and risk communication. Following the declaration of a pandemic and increasing spread in countries, we carried out a review of our case definition. We have added 3 new countries to the existing list of 5 high-risk countries with widespread community transmission. Therefore, 8 countries are in our priority list. Travelers from these 8 countries will undertake secondary screening at the point of entry.
Authorities continue to coordinate national response activities, and these include new guidelines for mass gatherings and further training of health workers across the 36 states. Government says it would require a concerted effort to curb the spread of COVID-19.
We have not advised against any closures or cancellation of large events. However, organizers must ensure that appropriate measures are in place, such as temperature scanners, hand washing facilities, etc.
One of the most important things I learned from China was what they called an all-of-society response. So the entire society was mobilized to move the country out of that outbreak phase. It wasn't left to government or doctors or port health services or China CDC. Every single person in that country was mobilized to move the country forward.
Aside the new guidelines, the health ministry is now escalating the need for a cashless policy to limit the exchange of cash at this critical time. As details of the virus are still being uncovered by research daily, government continues to advise citizens to constantly take all precautionary measures to keep all infections at bay. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Meanwhile, in Ghana, the government has closed down all schools in a bid to contain the spread of the coronavirus. Health officials said that the country's cases so far were all imported. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports from Accra.
A partial lockdown of the University of Ghana campus. Lecture rooms closed, all teaching and learning activities suspended. That's the response by authorities after one of the students in this university tested positive for the coronavirus.
Halting of our education and everything is good for us at the moment because we don't know how it's going to spread because the disease is very dangerous.
Health authorities say all of the cases confirmed so far in Ghana were imported. The university student who tested positive reportedly traveled to the US and returned with the disease. University authorities say they are tracing people the students who tested positive may have come into contact with. They have also urged students not to leave the campus. But some students are already packing out. Others say they don't see the need for restrictions.
The fact that we are having this pandemic effect, or the fact that we are having these things going around, shouldn't restrict academic stuff.
Ghana is revising its response to the coronavirus outbreak, moving beyond just screening and surveillance at entry points. The government says it is restricting people from countries that have recorded more than 200 cases of COVID-19 from coming into Ghana.
All public gatherings, including conferences, workshops, funerals, festivals, political rallies, sporting events, and religious events such as services in churches and mosques have been suspended for the next 4 weeks.
All schools in the country have shut down indefinitely. They are working to activate online platforms so students can work from outside the classroom. And for those who remain on the university campus, the lesson of the day: to continue taking precautionary measures, including using hand sanitizers, to help keep the coronavirus at bay. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Tanzania has closed schools for 30 days after the country reported its first case of COVID-19. CGTN's Daniel Kija looks at how residents of Dar es Salaam have adjusted their lives to protect themselves from the virus.
The threat of the virus has affected the daily lives of Tanzanians in everything from how they greet each other in the streets, to how they entertain themselves after work, to how they conduct business meetings. Here in Tanzania's biggest market, COVID-19 has made a difference for merchants and shoppers. Thousands of tourists who would ordinarily come here have cancelled their flights. And for locals who shop here, it's also made a difference. Well, that's because most of the items usually sold here come from China.
And we have seen shops right now running low on merchandise, and still they are weighing their options on how can they act within this particular outbreak landscape. Yeah.
Some people are taking the government's advice seriously to be more diligent, avoid large crowds, and improve personal hygiene.
My mom travels a lot for work, but now she's suspended, so she can't travel again. Her office doesn't want her to travel and stuff.
You can be affected in the easiest way possible, although you take different precautions, but also you can be affected. So like a lot of people, especially in public transports, most people when they're going from place to place, especially in our country, Tanzania, there's 20, 30 people in one bus. If one person has corona, it's very easy for it to spread.
In congested areas, it's a problem. It's going to be hard to control large crowds, people playing games or football matches. It is hard, but we're going to try to do as instructed.
To that end, even sports have been affected. The Tanzania Football Federation has banned shaking hands during matches. The government asked schools, religious centers, government and private institutions to supply hand sanitizers at all building entry points, something that organizers of an event called Innovation Week put into practice.
We have been receiving over 6,000 people, and these people are from different parts of the world. And because we are aware of the dangers of corona, we have kept measures and kept hand sanitizers on most of our registration tables and other posts where people pass by.
Pharmacists say that the sales for sanitizers, masks and gloves have increased, with people stocking up on these items in the hopes of protecting their families. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
South Africa's governing African National Congress has postponed all its upcoming conferences as the country deals with the COVID-19 pandemic. Other political parties in the country, such as the Economic Freedom Fighters and the Democratic Alliance, have also rescheduled their major events. CGTN's Yulisa Njamela has more.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa addressed the media as ANC president less than 24 hours after he declared a national state of disaster.
The ANC did need to embrace what government has announced, and the ANC expressed itself in full support of the measures that government announced and wants to actively participate in ensuring that the measures that were announced yesterday are implemented.
Ramaphosa announced that all upcoming ANC conferences are cancelled until further notice.
The ANC itself has some tasks, and some of its tasks are to curtail its own activities, particularly in relation to the large meetings that were being planned and that are part and parcel of the process of the work that we do in the African National Congress.
Ramaphosa also announced that the governing party would conduct door-to-door visits in communities to educate people about the COVID-19 virus. The governing party took a moment to commend China for the way that country has dealt with the outbreak of the coronavirus. Secretary General Ace Magashule says China has the capacity to assist South Africa deal with this virus.
We have been working very close with China. It's part of BRICS. It's part of a country which has supported us during apartheid. It continues to support us. Our relationship is a very strong relationship, party to party, government to government. And they are indeed friends in need. They've always been there. And we are still working together. We are going to make sure that we have agreed that China has the necessary capacity. Where they are supposed to work with us, we'll appreciate.
A number of political parties have also cancelled their upcoming conferences. Yulisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, here in Kenya, the government has confirmed the country's fourth COVID-19 case. According to the Cabinet Secretary for Health, Mutahi Kagwe, the patient travelled from London and arrived in Kenya on the 9th of March. The tracing of people who may have come into contact with the patient is now ongoing. The government has so far conducted 111 tests on suspected cases. A total of 71 have tested negative and 36 people are still under observation. The government has shut down all learning institutions in a bid to curb the spread of the virus. Some businesses and government offices have also been shut down. All those traveling into Kenya will be required to sign a legal document agreeing to observe quarantine rules.
Today, we have received confirmation of another case of coronavirus following tests carried out to a patient in one of our private facilities. This now brings the number of confirmed cases of coronavirus in the country to 4. Quarantine is not a voluntary measure. It is a mandatory measure which can lead to a big fine and a jail sentence. This measure at the airport is going to be instituted further by making those traveling into the country to swear a legal document that they will comply with what they are supposed to do. We have urged our people, and we will continue to urge Kenyans, please stay away where people are congregating.
The Chinese government has donated 12,000 reagent testing kits to Africa. Chemical reagents are used to extract nucleic acids from testing samples. Now, this is an important part of confirming the presence of the coronavirus. The reagents were sent to assist countries as they continue to record more cases of COVID-19. Now, measures to limit the severity of the outbreak in Europe are becoming stricter by the day. Some 100 million EU citizens have been ordered to stay indoors, and internal borders are starting to close. It's raising alarm bells in Brussels. Officials there are growing increasingly concerned over what this could mean for the flow of desperately needed goods. Tony Waterman has more.
This is the new reality in Brussels. Empty streets, quiet squares, shuttered shops. Belgium has been a near ghost town since Friday at midnight, when all bars and restaurants were forced to shut their doors for 3 weeks.
It's completely confusing, okay? I know we have to close, but that's it.
Other countries quickly followed suit. Restaurants, cafes, cinemas, schools, and most shops across France, Spain, Ireland, and Austria are now closed. Movement has also been severely restricted. 100 million citizens across Europe are now in lockdown. Borders are also being sealed. Germany shut its borders with France, Austria, and Switzerland on Monday. Denmark, Poland, Norway, and the Czech Republic, to name just a few, have also introduced border controls. It's led to a stark warning from Brussels.
If we do not take action now, shops will start facing difficulties in refilling their stocks of certain products coming from elsewhere in the single market.
The Commission once again appealed for coordination. President Ursula von der Leyen also introduced strict restrictions on the export of protective gear like face masks to non-EU states. Member countries wishing to export such supplies will now need explicit authorization.
A recession is now expected in Europe. The European Commission says that this outbreak could shave 2.5 percentage points off of real GDP. To help soften that blow, individual governments have been unleashing their own aid packages. The challenge now for EU finance ministers, who are having a video conference call on Monday, is how to bring all of these disparate pledges into one solid economic package. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Brussels.
Iran has temporarily freed about 85,000 prisoners amid the coronavirus outbreak. A judiciary spokesman said half are security-related prisoners, and they have taken precautionary measures to confront the outbreak in the jails. A return time of those released is yet to be decided. Iran has recorded one of the worst outbreaks outside China. The death toll has now reached 853. More than 14,000 people have been infected across the country. Authorities have closed the country's holy Shiite Muslim sites and shrines in Tehran and Qom. Now, Chinese health officials say they are working on a new coronavirus vaccine that will enter trials by late April. The National Institute for Food and Drug Control say they are using 5 technical routes since the research process and technical characteristics of various vaccines are different. Chinese experts say it is necessary to fully study the vaccine's effectiveness and safety before it enters the clinical trial stage. We'll take a look at some other news coming from around the world after the break, including this. As a new cabinet is sworn in, displaced South Sudanese hope for peace. And in Nigeria, making a killing from Lagos traffic jams.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca. Among the crowds in Cairo.
Who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile. Along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
South Sudan's new government is promising not to return the country to war after 6 years of civil violence. The country's new cabinet, comprised of former warring parties, has been sworn in. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
A cabinet comprising of 35 ministers, 10 deputy ministers and 5 vice presidents is now sworn in. It is hoped the formation of a new unity government resulting from a 2018 peace deal will end 6 years of civil war in South Sudan.
South Sudanese are very dynamic people. They can change very fast, but it needs our collective political will. Let us have political will to avoid tribalism, to avoid nepotism in the country, and look at each other as brothers and sisters. One people, one country.
The civil war displaced more than 4 million South Sudanese people. Livelihoods are destroyed, and the new government is expected to prioritize peace building and reconstruction of destroyed infrastructure.
I am very happy. There are no more sounds of gunshots. Things are getting better, but the government should do more, because in this country, things can change rapidly. We can have war out of something small.
The situation in the country is changing. I am seeing many good things now. The government officials are speaking with one voice, despite the fact that they are from different factions.
The parties to the peace deal are still working to establish a parliament. The peace agreement dictates that the National Assembly should be made up of 550 members. State governors are also yet to be appointed. The United Nations is calling on the new executive to speed up the process so that peace and order is restored across the country as soon as possible. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Staying in South Sudan, where hope for lasting peace is slowly growing amongst internally displaced people. Here's the story of John Roto, who's hoping the current peace deal and unity government will hold. Laura Walubengo has that story.
At the ripe age of 65, John Roto was born into a farming community in the former Sudan, now South Sudan. While growing up, he knew more about conflict than agriculture. He was born in a war zone. At that time, the Sudan People Liberation Front was battling Khartoum for more freedoms, which culminated into independence for South Sudan in 2011. He thought it was time to relax and rebuild his life. He was wrong. Conflict would soon break out barely 2 years later after President Salva Kiir and his then Vice President Riek Machar had a bitter fallout which turned into a deadly conflict. It affected him not once, but twice.
My house was burnt twice. The first year I fled to this camp, then I renovated it, then there was a sense of peace. Again, it was torched. This is the suffering I'm going through.
He is now one of the many internally displaced persons living in Remenze camp. Unable to farm, he now makes fishing nets, which earn him a lot more than $3 a day.
This is what I've been doing to earn a living, because we do not go out of the camp to farm.
With the recent formation of a unity government, which followed a peace deal that was a result of regional and international pressure, John is once again hopeful. Just like many of his compatriots, he's hoping that this deal holds and lasting peace reigns once more for them and their children.
There is no peace. My 2 children were born in war. I don't know how the government is going to help these children grow without hearing gunshots. The war has affected their minds and they're behaving like they're not well mentally.
South Sudan has over 1 million internally displaced persons. International aid agencies have been warning of a looming food crisis due to the conflict and the recent locust invasion. John, however, wants to go back to the life that he has not seen for decades of being a farmer in his native Equatoria state. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
And to South Africa now, where cleanup operations are still underway in Cape Town after a massive fire swept through the world-famous Table Mountain National Park. Here's CGTN's Travis Andrews with more.
It's taken more than 200 firefighters to bring a massive fire at the foot of Table Mountain under control, and these are just some of the results. The battle against this blaze has been costly indeed, which include injuries that have left some firefighting personnel in hospital needing medical care. Others, though, are still putting out the hot spots.
With a strong southeasterly wind, it was fanning this fire tremendously. As you can see, it jumped over Kloofneck Road onto Signal Hill, across Lions Head and down to Netterton Street. Also the section that they call the Glen between Camps Bay Drive and Lower Clover Road, that section is also affected.
And all these are sections of the mountain range frequented by locals and tourists. No lives were lost though, as people were led to safely quickly enough.
It's very dry and we're dealing with a lot of mopping up operations, obviously with a lot of tree stumps that will need a lot of cooling down, and I think it will take a considerable time to extinguish this fire.
The fire caused extensive vegetation damage and at one stage even threatened the Table Mountain Cableway Station, which is a key tourism drawcard. And it came this close to going up in flames as well, if not for the firefighting assets making their way to the scene quickly enough. But other structures weren't so lucky.
We didn't have really aerial support due to the high winds, and the guys worked tirelessly to save numerous properties. Yes, we had a couple of properties that was burned down, but and a couple of properties that was damaged, but they managed to save quite a few properties as well.
For now, though, the fire may be largely under control, but many believe it's left a scar on a mountain that was voted as one of the 7 natural wonders of the world. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
Let's go to Nigeria now, where traffic jams have become part of daily life in the commercial city of Lagos. But as bad as the situation might seem, many are finding ways to cash in on road congestion. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmus with more.
Now, you often hear people complain about the traffic jam in Lagos, and to be candid, in most cases, it could be a nightmare. It's something every commuter in this city loves to avoid. But there are certain categories of people who really survive on this traffic jam. As a matter of fact, every day they wake up, they pray that there's traffic jam, possibly across the entire city. And so we're going to look for them now and let you know how exactly they operate.
After just a few minutes of driving, we ran into a traffic jam and naturally they surfaced. These vendors sell anything from newspapers, plantain chips, sausages and small chops, bottled water, phone accessories, fruits and vegetables, socks, pillows, electrical appliances. The list is simply endless. For them, no traffic jam means bad business. And they hunt for traffic jams the way a hunter hunts for prey. When our vehicle came to almost a halt in traffic, I decided to do what many in this city would do when in a bad traffic jam, popularly called go slow here.
How much were your plantain chips? How much? 100. No, 50? 100. How much they say granite? 500. This granite get this one, so. Sir? Give me change. This one no dry well now.
It's dry, not brown color, sir. It's dry.
No brown like that. 600. Okay. So the fact is, there's virtually nothing you can't get to buy, stock in traffic like this. And these guys sell basically everything you can imagine. Anything at all you want, you can actually get in traffic. And it's really against the law to sell in traffic, but, to sell and buy actually in traffic. But then, the law is not enforced, and that's the reason why you'd have these guys selling openly. And of course, people buy openly as well. So you find them everywhere, and these guys would always hope and pray there's traffic jam, because it's only when there's traffic jam like this that they can actually make brisk business. So for them, traffic jams may be a nightmare for some people, especially commuters, but for these guys, it's a blessing.
With Lagos getting ever more congested, the vendors really don't have to go too far to find a traffic jam these days. It's simply around them.
Nobody informs us about the traffic in Lagos State. We know an area where there's traffic. Nobody give us information. And we know there's traffic every in and corner of Lagos State.
The irony is that as the city gets more jammed, the number of street vendors grows, just as the variety of merchandise they sell also increases. And even though street trading is outlawed in Lagos, there's a sense of helplessness that these guys have become an essential part of the city of over 20 million people. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Your business news up next with Raman Young.
That's right, Lindy. Here's what's coming up in business. South Africa's finance minister asks banks to take it easy on people they've lent money to as the country battles the COVID-19 epidemic. And the IMF says it can mobilize $1 trillion if need be in support of member states affected by this pathogen.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Now, South Africa declares a national state of disaster in its fight against COVID-19. The country's finance minister has reminded those present at a briefing in Tshwane that global liquidity is critical to keep economies around the world moving along.
As far as the banks are concerned, banks, as you know, are critical to our economic system, both in deposit taking and lending. They provide mortgage bonds and other forms of financing. So a conversation needs to be had about what to do in the times of crisis. Let's assume a number of workers are unable to go to work for one reason or the other, but they have a bond with a bank. What does that mean? It's a conversation to be had, not to force ourselves on them, but to say, let's have a conversation about all those things. So I think that kind of conversation is necessary. I suppose our primary objective at this moment is that the economy does not grind to a halt. It must continue to operate.
Elsewhere, the IMF's managing director says at least 20 more countries have asked about receiving aid to support the economies, given the economic damage they're likely to be facing from the coronavirus pandemic. Kristalina Georgieva also called for a strong, coordinated fiscal stimulus program in various economies to limit the economic fallout. She says the fund stands ready to mobilize its full $1 trillion lending capacity in order to help member states. Now, speaking of helping out economies, the Bank of England's new governor, Andrew Bailey, has pledged to do whatever it takes, essentially saying that he will take what he describes as prompt action to protect the UK's economy from any economic damage arising from this epidemic. In his first day on the job, Bailey said that the economic shock would be, quote, large, sharp, but temporary. CGTN's Richard Bestick reports from the City of London.
Effectively on a war footing, coronavirus has the UK economy in its sights with no precedent for a way out. A world crisis greeting the new man Andrew Bailey on his first day at the Bank of England.
He's arrived here with a massive task on his hands. The market's roiling, a very different kind of financial crisis. Not a top-down financial crisis like the last time, but a ground-up crisis. The retail industry being badly hit, aviation being slammed, every aspect of the British economy under attack as a consequence of coronavirus.
Bailey spent 20 years of his career at Britain's central bank, the ultimate insider. He's regarded as a safe pair of hands, promising to act promptly to prevent possible long-term damage to the UK economy.
And that's why you saw prompt action last week. That's why you will see prompt action again when we need to take it. You can be assured, the public can be assured of that.
Already there's speculation among economists that the Bank of England may reduce interest rates even further, and a resumption of the complex stimulus programme called quantitative easing.
There's a whole host of other things they could do too, which is around ensuring that the banks, which have been flushed with liquidity by the Bank of England, put some of that liquidity to work by helping businesses on the ground.
Those businesses already lining up to list a catalogue of economic damage from coronavirus. Bailey's baptism by financial fire on his first day, unlikely to be dampened down any time soon. Richard Bestick, CGTN, London.
Let's look at those markets before we come back to looking at the response from policymakers in Africa. Asian markets had a pretty mixed day after the pandemic sparked a historic fall in American equities. Chinese mainland markets ended the day lower. The Shanghai Composite Index and the Shenzhen component were down by 0.34 and 0.49% respectively. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index was up about 0.9% compared to its close on Monday. In Japan, the Nikkei 225 index also rose a little. South Korea's Kospi was over 2% in the red, however, that extended its slide for a fifth day in a row. Singapore's Straits Times Index closed down by over 1.5%. And back to the continent, Egypt's central bank has announced the largest ever rate cut to essentially front-run the economic damage from the COVID-19 pandemic. The Monetary Policy Committee cut policy rates by 300 basis points at an emergency meeting. Now, that effectively takes the overnight deposit rate down to 9.25% and the lending rate to 10.25%. The main operation rate has been cut to about 9.75%. The discount rate also fell by a similar margin to 9.75%. Now, these cuts are the largest made since the Egyptian pound was floated as part of a deal with the IMF back in November 2016. The central bank, however, didn't stop there. It has also given businesses and individuals a 6-month extension on their credit payments. And still in Egypt, the country's trade minister says a North African state can find opportunities within this COVID-19 pandemic. She says the government will assist manufacturers to boost domestic output and fill gaps in global supply chains triggered by businesses and societies slowing down activity in response to this pandemic. CGTN's Adela El-Marouki filed this report from Cairo.
COVID-19 is hitting Egypt hard. There is 11% reduction in trade from the Far East. That will reflect on the Suez Canal revenues. Tourism sector too is shrinking.
We have a pandemic, and this pandemic has affected Egypt like it affected other countries. Luckily, so far, the numbers are still low, but this doesn't mean that we should close our eyes. So far, we do not see losses except in the tourism. Hopefully, this will not last long, but every month we lose about 1 billion revenue of tourism.
The pandemic has seen some sectors in Egypt boom, among them pharmaceuticals, medical supplies, food and beverages. The Egyptian Minister of Trade and Industry believes Egypt could create an opportunity from that crisis.
We can make use of this crisis to increase our exports. Europe is in need of many products which we can provide without affecting our strategic reserves from these goods. We are planning to engage with products like ethyl alcohol, disinfectants, cotton and fabric products. We have companies already exporting to Europe and can expand production for that rising demand.
The Ministry of Trade and Industry is currently working to support Egyptian manufacturers with a bundle of assistance that will include procedural and financing support for Egyptian manufacturers who want to expand production for exportation purposes. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
And finally, a look at the response from Nigeria. The country's central bank says it will set up a $163 million fund to deal with economic fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic. The CBN Governor, Godwin Emefiele, says that the credit support is intended for loans to pharmaceutical companies that are planning to expand or set up drug manufacturing plants in Nigeria, and health companies that intend to build hospitals and clinics. Other measures include cutting interest rates on some central bank credit lines to 5% per annum, down from 9%, over a 12-month period. Just last week, the Finance Ministry said the West African country would actually cut down its record $34.6 billion budget for 2020 because oil prices have fallen by over 53% so far in 2020. Africa's top oil producer is now essentially collateral damage in a war for market share triggered by Saudi Arabia. Right, then I'll leave you there for the time being. But ahead at the top of the hour, we'll be back in South Africa. It was in a recession in the second half of 2019, plagued by chronic power shortages, and unemployment was close to record levels at about 30%. Add the COVID-19 pandemic to that cocktail, and how much worse can things really get? We'll have a preview for you from Johannesburg at 1800 GMT. See you then. For now, back to Lindy.
Thanks, Rama. Well, let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Nigeria's film industry looks to Bollywood and Hollywood to expand its market reach.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Nigeria's film industry, Nollywood, is looking to expand its horizons by collaborating with top industries abroad, like India's Bollywood and the United States' Hollywood. The aim is to expand their reach to a more global audience and create more lucrative opportunities for filmmakers. Our correspondent, Phil Ihaza, has more from Abuja.
I'm Mabel King.
Nigeria's Nollywood industry has produced movies that have grossed over $1 million. But that's small compared to other industries like Hollywood, where one movie can make more than $2 billion. Nollywood filmmakers are now looking to collaborate with the likes of Hollywood and Bollywood to produce movies that can have a wider reach and gross more in earnings.
One of the advantages of foreign partnership is that it gives you new audiences. When the film comes out, the Frenchman want to watch the film. Not necessarily because it's a fantastic film from Nigeria, but he want to watch it because there is somebody who is from his locality there who is in that film. So naturally, he wants to see that film.
Action!
According to UNESCO, Nigeria's Nollywood produces an average of 1,500 movies per year, making it the second most prolific industry in the world after Bollywood. But many of the Nigerian-produced movies are not internationally recognized. Experts say with more financial assistance from government and private bodies, filmmakers can create higher quality films that can compete in global stages, like winning its first ever Oscars.
Our financing is very, very poor. You know, we only finance films either getting money from the bank of industry, CBN, or you get from friends and family. But these monies now are monies that are being given for you to pay back with interest. There should be a special fund where people who have these kind of stories could access and make films that could represent the country in the Oscars.
Will you marry me? The government has ordered the release of about $20 million to creative industries, including its film sector.
Filmmakers say Nigeria could take advantage of its huge population with 500 languages and 250 tribes to tap into unique and diverse stories. They say with more collaboration and investment coming into the sector, the industry could grow by leaps and bounds. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
Your sports news coming up next. The Professional Squash Association calls off 33 tournaments due to the coronavirus outbreak.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
In your sports news, the